Hello and welcome to another episode of DeHaan on Fire, brought to you by Firewise Learning Academy. I'm your host, Tim Davis. DeHaan on Fire is a podcast and YouTube channel featuring education, commentary, and conversation with world-renowned fire investigator, Dr. John DeHaan. We've all been watching the news when a fire has occurred and a reporter asks an official about what the cause of the fire was, and they've responded that it was suspicious. But are there really any officially suspicious fires? That's the question I asked Dr. John DeHaan this week. DeHaan on Fire contains discussion and video not suitable for all audiences. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. Dr. DeHaan, are there any fires that should be classified as suspicious?
Not if the investigator is going to be quoted anywhere. That was an old term that investigators used to use when they didn't know at this point, but there were some indications that it could have been a deliberately set fire. And so their suspicion is leading them basically to continue their inquiry. But that the term has been abused so badly that it's completely investigators are strongly urged never to use the word because it suggests kind of the wrong thing. Because your temptation is, at least when I hear the word, is, well, this fire is suspicious. And my first question is, well, what is it suspicious of? And no, that's not what we mean. Well, if you're suspicious, that means you haven't concluded your investigation. You haven't reached a conclusion. And so it's still under investigation. And that's the correct term. For many years, investigators were strongly discouraged from saying that a fire is suspicious, and because there was no classification for it. And so when we started talking about, well, the appropriate term for it is under investigation, and then we got the resistance of some administrators, for instance, including the National Fire Data Collection people, that there's no classification for it. It has to be classified as either accidental or intentional. There is no in between. Well, you can't apply that rule to an ongoing investigation. That if you're still looking for pieces to fit into the puzzle, then the investigation is still under, the fire event is still under investigation. And that's really the appropriate term, because you're still collecting information. Ultimately, you may have to say, we can't say undetermined is the correct final verdict, and that is there simply isn't enough evidence to make a decision one way or another. Because the last thing you really want to do is take what is apparently an accidental fire and call it arson, because you don't want to call it accidental yet. You don't have enough information, because if you label it arson, that means you have criminal investigations started, you have other considerations coming in, playing a role, and you really don't want those complications. If you're undetermined, it's undetermined, pending further investigation, and then ultimately, if there's no hope, you've exhausted all the practical possibilities, then it is an undetermined fire. And I'm sure there's a lot of historical fires that are undetermined despite the passage of decades of inquiry.
Are you aware of any cases or instances where in court someone describing a fire as suspicious, and then later on that was used against them, to try to prove a bias or suggest a bias as evidence for perhaps the defendant?
Well, it's sometimes used as an attack on the professionalism of the investigator. If the cross-examiner is looking at the current literature that says, you're not supposed to use the word suspicious in terms of the fire circumstances, then he or she can say, well, are you aware that that you use the term suspicious, and that's not an approved term anymore. And so you get this, especially the older investigators go, well, we used to use that term. Well, why isn't it appropriate? And then they're kind of at a loss for a description of why isn't it appropriate.
Thanks for watching another episode of DeHaan on Fire, brought to you by Firewise Learning Academy. If you have any questions for Dr. DeHaan, please email them to questions@DeHaanOnFire. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. Ring the bell to get notifications of new uploads to the channel, and don't forget to set your devices to receive those updates. For now, signing off for Firewise Learning Academy and DeHaan on Fire, I'm your host, Tim Davis. See you next time.